Welcome to the Paranormal Pendle podcast, coming to you from the heart of Pendle Witch Country in the northwest of England. My name is Craig Bryant, author, investigator and collector of stories. Join me as we take a journey into the paranormal, UFO sightings, cryptozoology and big cats. This is the Paranormal Pendle podcast. Welcome to episode 25 of Paranormal Pendle, broadcasting to the Paranormal UK radio network at paukradio.com. My guest on this episode is John Tantalon, and I'm quite chuffed that I've got the pronunciation right this time, John. John's from North Edinburgh Nightmares, and he's a returning guest. I had John back on episode 11, where we had a really good chat about all things spooky in Edinburgh. Really enjoyed it, and I'm really chuffed that you've come back, and we're going to have another chat this time about two of my favourite things. And I said this on a recent podcast with, I think it was David Saunderson. My two favourite things are ghosts and pubs. So when we meld those two things together, I will sit and listen to stories for hours. So without any further ado, John, first of all, how are you?
Not bad. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you. Thank you for coming on. I know we've had to reschedule this, so my apologies for that. I'm going to hand over to you. I believe that you've done a YouTube video on your YouTube channel recently, which I admit, and I apologise well in advance that I haven't been able to have a look at it yet, but by all means, tell us about that. And really, I'm just fascinated to hear stories of haunted pubs in Edinburgh, because it's not a city that I've done much drinking in, I must be honest. I've done a little bit in the other place down the motorway from you. A few whiskey pubs. I do enjoy my single malt whiskies. I'm a bit of a Highland man, so I like the robust whiskies. So if there's any whiskey pubs or anything that you can recommend as well, that'd be in Edinburgh, that'd be great. But I'll stop rabbiting now, and I'll hand over to you, John. Haunted pubs in Edinburgh. Over to you.
Yes, well, last year when we were, trying to think of future episodes, I thought I've got a culmination of a few stories of the haunted pubs of Edinburgh. There are many. We got round to researching and putting the episode together. I think we came up with 6. There was six main ones, and there was some extras that we tagged on in a sort of an extra shorter episode at the end. And there was some fascinating stories. There was one called the Hunter's Tryst Inn, which goes back hundreds of years ago. It's at the foot of the Pendle Hills, and it had some documented stories regarding that of figures being seen, lights being on when there's nobody present, things being moved around. And when I was in chatting to the owner, a guy called Rab, there was an interesting story, and there had been an ex-employee came in who worked there 30 years previously. Can't remember the guy's name. And he was in with his wife, and they were having something to eat. And he says, "Yeah," he says, "I used to work here. It was great. It was a great job when it was the case. It was great that you got the accommodation with it, with the pub." And he says, "Oh, great." He says, "Where did you stay?" He says, "In the wee house. The wee house about." He says, "What wee house? There's no house here." And he goes, "Oh yeah, there is. We stayed in it." He says, "Honestly, I've been the manager for a few years now. I've never came across any bloody house." He says, "Watch, I'll show you." So he took him through the back, through to where they keep the barrels, etc. And there was a hatch in the ceiling. And above this pub, the Hunter's Tryst, there was a completely abandoned house that nobody knew was there because they'd taken the stairs away. They'd remodeled it. And this guy, he was absolutely dumbstruck by this. He let me go up and have a look. And it was like stepping back in time. There was a calendar on the wall for 2001, like people had just walked out. And it was quite spooky. It just added to the ambience. So that's the first one in the episode. There are many more.
Okay. What sort of manifestations did they get there then? Did he tell you what they see, or did he have any sort of personal experiences or anything like that that he could tell you about?
Well, there's been stuff documented, back for a long time. It was originally used as an inn back in the days, I think it was the 1700s, and there was a club called the 6 Foot Club that used to go hill walking in the Pentlands, and its members included Sir Walter Scott and Robert Louis Stevenson, and they'd go there. It was like just a gentleman's club for after your days hill walking. Then it became a dairy for many years, and then in the 60s it became a pub again, a hostelry, and that's where most of the sort of documented stories come in. So the main ones were the stories from 1986. An ex-employee claimed that the pub shook one day. Now, there was nothing nearby. I mean, it's like the Pentland Hills, it's solid stuff. And it was like something caused the pub to vibrate. There was also instances of things just lighting up when nobody's in. And that takes me on to the next one. So when I spoke to Rab, the manager, he says I had one sort of supernatural story. He had a couple, but he says there was one time that he came in, or he got called in, and the lights were on, like one section of the pub, another and another. And he says there's nobody in there. I'm not mucking about. I'm phoning the police. The police came, thought it was getting robbed. I mean, they got in, there wasn't a single person inside. It was completely locked. There was, as he said, it could have been a wee mouse, but I didn't think it was big enough to activate on that level. So when I was telling Rab, I produced a book by Ron Halliday, a famous Edinburgh ghost book, and there was a witness account of a ex-landlady called Marilyn in the 80s. I can't remember exactly when, and she had the exact same experience. She was out walking her dog, and she turned round to see the lights of the pub lighting up in sequence, and that was 35 years ago or something. So when I told Rab that one, he was quite interested. He'd also they'd seen something on the stairs, like some figure on the stairs, which has now been redeveloped. Yeah. And when you read the book from Ron Halliday, there was a story about what used to be a coffee area in the pub and a sighting there. So I wonder if it's possibly been the same area. But there were others. There's been lots going back to the 80s anyway. And that's about as far as we got with that.
It's interesting, actually, you mentioned about lights, because I've come across quite a lot of similar sort of phenomena where there's electrical issues, shall we say, where lights coming on, going off, on their own accord. My in-laws' old farmhouse that they lived in, that I talk about in the first book that I wrote, they had a heck of a lot of stuff going on with the electrics. So that's quite I think a good indicator, actually, that there is something going on there. Because there are electrical issues. So that's really interesting. So go on. Any other properties?
One thing I'll go back to with the Hunter's Tryst one was the fact that Rab was completely unaware of any of these stories from the Ron Halliday book. He'd never seen it in his life. And it was so similar, the woman's events, Marilyn from the 80s, and what she saw with the lights going on in sequence, to what Rab had said. And it kind of, I can't speak for him, but I think it spooked him a bit that there was that coincidence. So there was a few in the book compared to what he'd told me. Now, I've tried to meet him a few times, and for one reason or another, it got cancelled. So that was the first time I'd met the guy. And he rattled these stories to me, and I thought, that's amazing. It's like a blueprint almost.
Yeah.
So other good ones that we covered in this. There's some famous hostelries in Edinburgh, in the Grass Market, where they did a lot of the executions, back in the bad old days. There's a famous one called Maggie Dixon's, and she was known as Half Hang It Maggie. And that comes on to another pub we did. There was a pub called the Sheephead Inn, which is, they say, the oldest pub in Scotland. It's older than America, this thing. And it is at the foot of, it's in Duddingston Village at the foot of Arthur's Seat. It is an ancient pub. It's wonderful. And when we went, to investigate this one, well, not investigate, just to speak to the staff, get some stories, it turns out there are 2 stories attached to it. But back to Half Hang It Maggie. So after her execution in the Grass Market, and they hung her, they threw her in the cart and they took her to, I think she was going to the Musselburgh or North Berwick or something to be buried. And along the way, the driver stopped off at the Sheephead pub, the Sheepshead Inn, for a pint along the way. And while he was inside, Maggie Dixon came back to life. She wasn't dead at all. She was merely stunned. Now, she'd been hanging for 25 minutes and she came back to life. And because of that, they had to release her. They said, you've kind of survived the gallows, and that she lived another 25 years. Maybe she wasn't hanging for 25 minutes. It was 25 years she lived for. And she got a full pardon for it. So that's why the pub in the Grassmarket was named after her. But Sheephead. So inside it, you've got two famous ghosts. When you go in, it's a wonderful pub. It really is. At the start of it, by the bar, there's an old landlord known as the Major that is seen on occasion sitting propping up the bar. I wasn't fortunate enough to see him, but the other one is there's an incredibly old bowling alley at the back of the pub, 100+ years old, this thing. It's amazing. And in it is the spirit of a little girl that people have communicated with the lights at the bottom of the bowling alley. There was a couple of spooky experiences when we were there. Things that, I can't really say yes or no, but I did have a witness with me that saw them as well. So yeah, that was probably the most active pub out of the lot that we did, because we actually did witness a couple of spooky things.
Right. Could you elaborate on what happened?
Well, the first thing we noticed was I had my hooded top over the seat that I was sitting on. And we were going over the footage, the person that presented that episode, that section, Kerry, and I was showing her the footage and saying, what bit do you want to use there? And right before me, it was almost looked like my hooded top rising from the seat, but the hooded top didn't move at all. But something in the vicinity of the seat, it was like it stood up. So much so that I cursed loudly and upset the family next to us. There was kids, and I blurted out the F word and I had to apologise. But it was a shocker. There was other instances with the lights kind of flashing as Kerry asked questions when we were filming, and it did, and I witnessed it. And it was 5 in succession. We thought to ourselves, could people be mucking about? Are they watching us? Are they saying, watch this, we'll mess with them? But it was impossible. It was the busiest time on a Friday when they were running about daft, serving food, and the light flashed every time she asked that question. That was quite spooky.
Yeah. So again, electrical phenomena. So that's that's quite weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm making a mental list as we're going along of pubs that I'm going to have to visit, because I am going to have to visit Edinburgh. I have been to Edinburgh. I'll
yes,
but I've certainly not been on a ghostly pub crawl. So I think I'll be making a list of places to visit. Are there any sort of daft question? There will be sort of dedicated whiskey pubs in Edinburgh. The reason I'm asking is because I went in a really great one in Glasgow, actually, called the Pot Still, which is just up from the station, the main station in the centre of Glasgow.
All right.
Had a fantastic 50th birthday. It was actually my 50th birthday that day. We'd gone up there for the weekend, myself, my wife, and my son, and she abandoned me in there, basically. Left me to my own devices. So you can imagine it was quite an experience. So I'm just wondering if there's anything similar in Edinburgh, and if there's any that are haunted, would be even more of a bonus, really.
There most definitely is. I'm not really aware of them. I know there was a chap I was speaking to, and he used to manage one. He managed it for 4 years, I think, and it's next door to one of the pubs that we cover in it. I've never been in it, but it's a dedicated whiskey bar on the Royal Mile, and I think it's meant to be pretty good. The guy Paul McVitie was telling me the story, but he was telling me about another pub he'd managed. It wasn't about that one. I don't think he had any sort of spooky stories about the whiskey pub. There certainly is one on the famous Royal Mile. There will be others. But the story he was telling me,
going
was
off tangents a bit, aren't we, really? But that's plain whiskey.
Was about a pub on the outskirts of Edinburgh, and it had some quite sort of spooky stories he was telling me about. But yeah, there certainly is. I'm not a huge whiskey drinker. I mean, that's probably why I've not kind of found them, but there's bound to be, it's Edinburgh, it's tourist central.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, go on. Any more pubs that you investigated then?
There were many. I'm keeping the best till the very end.
Okay.
But there was some other absolute crackers that we visited. There was the Mitre Bar, which is next door to your whiskey bar I was telling you about. The Mitre has got a chair stuck to the wall above the bar, and they say that there was a bishop. Now, what was his name? A bishop that stayed there, and they reckon he was buried beneath the floor of the pub. And this is known as the bishop's throne, that was protected in the basement when there was a huge fire in Edinburgh many years ago. They reckon that the bishop haunts the pub looking for his throne that's up on the wall, fixed to the wall. There was an incident, another electrical instance, with a jukebox that they've got in the Mitre. And there was stories of people being electrocuted working on it. They reckon the spirit changes the songs if it doesn't like the songs that are on the jukebox. And again, this is documented. It's in a book as well about the Mitre. What other good ones? There was lots of smaller stories we covered. There was some really good ones. There was a brilliant guy called Graham Milne, who's written some great books about haunted Aberdeen. Graham appears in the new episode, and he's doing a new one as well about being a Confessions of a Haunted Tour Guide, I think it's called. But he was telling me an amazing story about a famous pub on Nidri Street, on the site of the Edinburgh Vaults. It's part of the Vaults, and the pub's called the Banshee Labyrinth. And this, it used to be known as Nicholl Edwards, who was a guy that was involved with witch trials. And in this story, he says that when the people were renovating it as Nicholl Edwards, the child that was with the couple who were doing the renovation asked his parents, who's the man standing watching us? The fire ghost, the guy with the burnt face. And after that, it didn't take them long to down tools and get out of the pub. There was another story about when it was being renovated and they uncovered a chimney. And inside the chimney, they found a child's shoe with the name Molly in the shoe. Now, when he was, doing research for the book, he was speaking to one of the staff from there, and she swears blind that one morning when they opened up the pub, there was, in the condensation of the window, there was a child's handprint in the condensation. And as he states, no children are allowed in the pub. It's strict, kind of 18s only. So it's got some great stories. I've spoken to other people with experiences in the toilet about things opening the door when they're in the cubicle, but the Banshee Labyrinth's a treat and a half, and part of the vaults into the bargain. It's part of the Nidri Street vaults, which are very famous.
So what's the name of that book that you just mentioned, just in case? The
new one. That one, he's done a few. He did one called Aberdeen's Haunted Heritage. He's from Aberdeen originally.
Okay. He's
done a few books about there. He's been doing this a while. But the new ones, he does sort of ghost walks up in the town, the old town. And it's called Confessions of a Haunted Tour Guide, I think the name of the new book.
Oh.
He's been working on it for a while. I've helped him with some bits of it.
Okay.
And it's going to be a cracker when it comes. It's going to be full of good stories. Graham's quite a character. He's got some good stories. And again, he appears in the episode telling you about another pub, the Tolbooth Tavern, which is massively historic building in the Royal Mile. There was instances that there was a woman he spoke to that was she was at a wake after a funeral, and a book came flying off the shelf in this pub, the Tolbooth. And when it opened the page, her name was on the page inside the book. I can't remember, her name was Heather something.
Yeah.
And it was the name was in the book. There was a couple of other instances he talks of, but it's good. It's a very old pub with lots of good history, scary history, when it was used as a jail. for prisoners and witch trials and all kinds of stuff. So that was a good one. What other ones did we do? So yeah, Niddry Street, just off topic. 2 weekends ago, we were in there. We did an investigation in the vaults on the Saturday with Spirit Vision Paranormal Research from Cheshire, and a group from Cumnock called Paranormal Footprints. And they did. I had to leave at 4 or something. I had a Hampshire medium up with me called it's going to kill me. I can't remember his second name. Dan Hill. Poor Dan, good friend. Dan Hill was up, and some of the stuff that Dan picked up on in the vaults was terrifying. And we've got it all recorded for when we put the next episode together. But some of the stuff, there was an incredible coincidence as well that you'll see when we do the episode. It was someone we discovered way down the line, like a week later afterwards, with some info. But anyway, yeah, the vaults, I mean, that's got lots of incredibly haunted, including 3 pubs on it. You've got the famous Bannerman's at the bottom, which is used a lot for gigs and sort of rock bar. I don't know if that's got many ghost stories. The Banshee Labyrinth has got some belters, and the top of it you've got Whistle Binkies, which is a very haunted Edinburgh pub. We did a investigation a couple of years ago, and that was very spooky. Some of the stuff that happened in there. That was the first time I'd ever done anything like that. It was with Spirit Vision again. So there's a host of them on that street alone, leading down to the Cowgate, and all part of the Niddry Street vaults.
So can you elaborate on what happened then with that investigation, that first one?
The first one, right? Have I not told you about this one before? So what happened was we went in there, we had it all night. It was during the pandemic in 2020. Spirit Vision, first time I'd ever met them. We went in there, and they had all kinds of stuff set up around the pub, all new to me. I'd never seen this before. And they had a glass, and there's 3 little booths at the bottom of the pub. And they had it was like a cat's toy on a glass, and they were asking it questions and stuff. And there was very little happening. I say, switch it around a bit. So they got Sarah from the group, they got the manageress, Morven, and another girl who worked there. And the 3 of them sat, and it started getting very excitable. It started talking, answering questions. They were asking questions about, what were men bad to you? What happened? Did you die here? Did you work here when you were alive? And presuming it to be a woman. Now, the 2 ghosts that are in there is one called the Watcher and one called the Imp. And I said to them, I says, what makes you think it's a woman you're talking to? Both the ghosts are male. And that's when it just stopped. It didn't like the fact that they'd kind of sussed out, I think. But, we tried it many times and it wouldn't go off. They picked up they picked up a voice on a recorder. They picked up things through a spirit box. I believe they heard children on this. Again, it's not really my 40. They're more into the sort of, analysing stuff. Yeah. I'm more into the history. But yeah, there was, I was there till 4 or 5 o'clock maybe, and they did, it's on an episode on their channel, But yeah, it was a famous pub, the Banshee Labyrinth.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, the catacombs that are underneath Edinburgh, what did you call them?
Yeah, the Niddry Street vaults.
Yeah, the vaults. That's it. Sorry, my memory's terrible. Yeah, I mean, what's the history of the vaults then? What were they originally sort of dug? Well, they've obviously been dug out, haven't they? So,
yeah.
What was their original purpose?
Originally, they were used as just premises for shops, for businesses, etc. And I believe they existed for maybe 30 years, 40 years. And after a while, because of the condensation, Edinburgh is a very damp place. They said it's no good for the businesses. It's too wet, it's too moist. So they gave them up. And that's when the squatters moved in. So you got people taking over the vaults for slightly salacious businesses, that became for, kind of prostitution, for, gambling dens, for, all kinds of stuff. People with absolutely no money would live there because they were squalid conditions. So it was a bit of not red light district, but a kind of a rougher part of town when Edinburgh was greatly developing at that time. So rumoured, I don't know how true it is, that Burke and Hare stayed in there as well for a bit. There was also, talk of they stored bodies in it and all kinds of stuff. But it was basically a kind of shattered part of town.
Right.
Years later, so it sat completely forgotten about. It was sealed up in the late 1800s, I believe. And then in the mid-80s, 1985, they made a discovery. Now, it was an ex-Scotland rugby player called Norrie Rowan, I think. He discovered the vaults. He broke through and found them from his house. And that was when they started digging them out and saying, what have we got here? There's this vast multitude of tunnels and caverns right under the bridge. And since then, it's been used for, a venue for weddings. There's been, places for gigs, there's pubs. So they've all been brought back to life through that. But it seems that some of the characters from way back in the day are still there now.
So do you know any stories? Have you been told any stories about any ghosts down there?
Yeah, I mean, the famous one is, there's many, there's tons of them, but the famous one is about this guy, the Watcher, that's, meant to be a chap in a hat and a long sort of cloak that goes around, and he's not a sort of friendly character. He's not happy of anybody being there. So it's all connected. The whistle binkies, the banshee alarm, they're all part of the vaults. They're all connected somehow. There was also a coven used to use it sometime in the 90s, I think. And they were I can't remember the correct, but it was Coven of the something Red Dragon. And they had a stone circle that they used in one of the vaults. And they believed that whatever was in this circle was very, very evil, and the Coven weren't happy about using it. So they moved a couple of rooms down. It's still there today, completely with all their equipment. They've just sealed it off when I believe their leader died. I can't remember his name. And it's sealed off and they moved to another premises. But this stone circle is meant to be a real hot spot for people witnessing, things, be it becoming sick. When they take you on the tour of it, people claim to have felt nauseous when they've stood in the circle. And when we did it, Dan, the medium, he certainly picked up on stuff. I can't remember the term he used. I think the word was diabolical. Says there's diabolical practices within this circle. It seemed to pick up on quite a lot from it. But yeah, there are many. I mean, I've just been vaulted mad this month because I've been doing nothing but reading about it and stuff. So I can't really remember much else. But that was the main stories from what I remember. But there are many, many other ones.
Yeah. Okay, let's move back onto pubs then. You said you've got some really good ones, so
yeah,
can we move on to the really good ones?
So let's think about this. Now, there was one down in Leith. There was a pub called the Leith Depot, and I went in and spoke to the staff there, and it's quite a kind of trendy gastropub type affair now. It never used to be. And they said, the staff says, we've never witnessed anything remotely sinister in here. It's been many different names over the years, and again, very rough pubs along the way. And there was a time that it was known as, for goodness sake, what was it called? It was owned by a Hibs football player. It was called Maranello's. Then it was called the Bay City. It had other names. PJ Lyle's it was called. And there was people hearing disturbances from upstairs. There's a wee function room up the stairs, and people could hear things crashing about, footsteps going across the floor, all when nobody at all was in there. And they reckon that it is a customer, an ex-customer, who's not happy with the way the pub has become. And he didn't like the changes from when he used to drink there. That's what they reckon. The staff now say they've not heard a thing, they've not heard any disturbances. So he's certainly not active anymore, this disgruntled regular. That's quite a good one, the Leith Depot. What other ones did we cover? There was the Sheephead, there was that one, there was there are many others, but I'm keeping the best one till last for you. I'll tell you that one right now. So, purely by accident, I was sitting in a Leith pub and I was doing a bit of research for it, and I was going through some of the other ones. And the one came up called the Star Bar. I said, I've never heard of the Star Bar in my life. I've lived here all my life. So I said, where is it? And I looked it up. And I said, I'm going to just put the pint down and go and find this place. And I found it, and it's down a wee back street in the new town of Edinburgh. And it's been there for a lifetime, this hidden gem of a pub. I went in and spoke to the staff. Now, the ghost story, there are a few ghost stories with this pub, but most of all, it has a cursed item within its walls. And that was, an incredible story. In the basement of this pub is a cursed skull that they stipulate in the contract to any owners that you cannot move the skull from the premises. So I went in and spoke to the staff, and I've been in several times since, spoke to the owner, spoke to the manageress, whose family have been connected with this pub for a long time. So they reckon it's built on a Jewish cemetery, hence the name The Star. It used to have a 5-pointed star outside the pub. They don't know the origins of the skull, but they have had examples of when people have moved the skull and what's happened to them. So back in the 50s or 60s, there was a guy who got the skull and he brought it upstairs and had it behind the bar, and he had like little dots in the eyes lighting up, making a spectacle of it. And the same owner hanged himself from the trap door into the basement, which is still there today. It's all documented. There is a sort of newspaper cutting we show in the episode about the incident. There was another one when somebody moved the skull and he put it in another pub, and in that same pub he moved it to, somebody held the pub up and shot him dead. The guy got killed, gunned down. The skull went back. There was another instance of somebody moving the skull, and when they were getting a new bar made and the place went on fire, the workman's yard burned to the ground. There was others. There's about 5 terrible stories of this bloody skull. And in the end, when we were filming, they says, well, can we go and see this skull? And we had to speak to the owner. He went, are you sure? So he said, yeah, we'll give it a go. So they did. They let us go down and film in the horrible basement of this ancient pub with a skull. And we never, in the end, I never had the guts to move the bucket on top of the skull. I was that scared, I didn't want to touch the damn thing, but it was there. So the strangest thing, when you look at the footage, when we get back, there are 2 reflections, it seems. There's nothing that could reflect in that basement at all. It's that dark and dismal. There's nothing. And you see what appears to be a face on the wall where the skull is, and the face looks like me. That was the spooky bit. So I thought it must have reflected off something. I thought, what? And I've still analysed this to death and thinking it's a coincidence. There's no, it could only be. But it looks very like me when you see it close up, this picture. And I thought, could it be a reflection? And, I was using like my phone on a sort of gimbal device, and there was just nothing it could reflect off to cause it. And there was 3 of us down there filming at the time, and it was a real oddity, this thing. The skull is an incredible story. And anyone visiting Edinburgh, I would highly recommend tracking down the Star Bar, because it's something else. It is such a quirky wee pub. There was another, one of the staff members tells a story of an instance with a strange old man comes in to the pub when she's opening up. So you have to tune in to see that one about to report somebody lying dead in their beer garden. But that's another good story too. But yeah, the Star Bar was one of my favourites when we were making the episode. It's one of those things, we're having 2 or 3 months of research. I'm sick of the sight of pubs now, because I've been in so many times.
So which will be your favourite place that you visited then, do you think?
Out of them all, the Star Bar, it was just such a quirky story. And, we got to know the staff really well. They were brilliant. They really were. So the Star, but they were all good. They were all really good. I mean, the Hunter's Tryst, so old, it's steeped in history. The Sheephead, the location alone is incredible. And the Shadowy Arthur's Seat, it's older than America. But the Star, the story, just kind of really gave me the creeps.
The skull.
You know, when they were actually showing you the evidence, like the newspapers and stuff, saying, there you go, that happened. It was like omen sort of stuff, you know, like for bad luck and what all happened to the place.
Reminds me of the story. There's a story local to here in a village close to Bolton near Manchester, and it's called the Timberbottom Skulls. And it was a similar story where they dug up a pair of skulls actually near to a very old stately home called Turton Tower, and the skulls were taken to a local farm which was called Timberbottom Farm, and every time that they were moved from the mantelpiece, all sorts of paranormal activity happened. And in fact, they actually one of the farmers who lived there, I believe, threw them into the local stream, and all hell broke loose. And he eventually had to go and find them, go and fish them out of the stream and put them back onto the mantelpiece. So there is something, I think, particularly creepy about skulls. And you know, if they're associated with an old property like that, I think it makes them even more interesting.
I'd never heard any of this in my life. You know, I've lived here all my days, and when I went in, and you know that it's not a well-known story. I mean, a lot of people know this pub from when they were students or whatever. They used to go there, but very few people know the story of the skull. But it is out there. You know, it's documented, but it's a real kind of best kept secret of the part. You know, it's, I mean, you know, some of the famous stories of Edinburgh. You know, you've got things about Mackenzie Poltergeist. You've got the story of the Wizard of West Bow, but the skull, nobody really knows it. It's a you know, it's kept there in the basement. You know, and it's an absolute cracker.
So, shall we have one last really great story then? What's your absolute favourite story that you've heard with regards to haunted pubs in Edinburgh?
Right, let's think of a couple of. Well, there was a good one called the Crammond Inn. Now, I did an episode all about Crammond. Crammond Village is down, you know, in along the road from me. It's a idyllic, scenic spot of Edinburgh, and it's got some good spooky stories. But it's got a pub that's sadly closed. It's been closed for a long time, and it's called the Crammond Inn, and it's steeped in history. Incredible views of the Forth from the beer garden, and that's got a couple of spooky ones. It's just kind of textbook stuff with glasses rattling, you know, people seeing shadows behind the bar, finding 5p pieces was another one. So that it's kind of default stuff. It's been closed a long time. I tried to get in touch with the owners, and it's owned by this kind of brewery that's not like others, called Samuel Smith's, I think.
Oh yeah.
And you know the one. And
Yorkshire,
I just,
the Yorkshire.
Is it right? Yeah. So I couldn't get a hold of anyone really to you know, talk about it, but I bet you that's got some belters in there. When I was on the show before, did I ever tell you the story of old Eck the Cadger? Did I ever tell you that one?
I think you did. No.
Right, this is a good one. Now, where do I begin? So, years ago, in the 90s, when there was a local pub called Spears Bar. And I'd go there with my mates and stuff. And it was the nearest pub to where we are. There's nothing really here. There's a couple along the front, but nothing like Spears. And there was an old neighbour that he was in there every night. He'd set your watch on this guy called Douglas Roberts. And he was a proud trade unionist. He was a Welshman, member of the Postal Union. And he'd tell you stories all night, interesting stories. The same stories every time you saw him. And at the end of the night, he'd always say, right, it's getting late. I've got one more to tell you before we hit the road. And I heard it every time, the same story, but it was a good one. And he said that there was an old man that lived in the street Royston Terrace, long from Spears Bar. And he said that this guy's reputation because all he'd be doing was tapping people for things. He'd go in and try and get a paper and say, I need to read about the racing results. I'll square you up at the end of the week, pal. And he said, give me a nip just now from behind the bar. I'll be right back. And he just tapped everyone all the time. And in the end, he called Hector Eck the Cadger, like Cadger being he was always tapping people. So the story was that sometime in the late 60s or the early 70s, Eck the Cadger actually won a load of money on a horse, and he ran out of the bookies, chuffed a bit, run into Spears Bar and tell everyone the good news, and he ran into the path of a bus. Oh. So they said that after that, Eck continued to visit Spears, and people had seen him in the same spot at the bar, hanging about, sitting in the booths, and in the actual street itself. You know, I think it was another postman said to see a man with his description of this guy with a flat cap in the pub. Now, I've spoke to people about this, and people have told me, you know, I've never heard that story in my life. You're full of shit. And then it keeps going back to me, the people that used to sit in his vicinity. There was a famous guy, he was a Labour councillor who's long gone, and he knew the story, you know. So how much of it is true, I don't know, but it was just a beauty of a story at the end of the night in this pub, and he'd finish off by pointing, saying, Eck might be watching you for the corner of the bar. And that, because I walk past the pub so often, I've never forgotten that one. And, you know, the story for old Douglas, but it was a cracker, Eck. And the name alone, Eck the Cadger. Yeah, you know, it's got a good ring to it.
Great
the
story.
Pub is closed.
Is it?
The pub, it renamed, it opened as a sort of bit of a gastro pub called the Inverleith. And I was in, they let us film in there, and we told the story and stuff. It just never had the same sort of feel. And then it reopened as Spears, and I thought, well, it's back to the pub how he remembers it. I wonder if there'll be any sign of this old guy turning up again. But it's closed again. I don't know what happened. Right. That's one of my favourites. And what I'd give to if I met somebody that either knew the guy or knew the story, you know.
Yeah. No, it's a great one to finish off with that. Whereabouts can people find your work then? You've got a YouTube channel, haven't you?
Yes, just North Edinburgh Nightmares in the search. It's constantly being updated, but and all truth be told, I've slowed down a bit because I'm doing lots of things now. I write for a local magazine. I do a column each month about sort of ghost stories in Edinburgh, called the Lether magazine. It's a free one, actually, to distribute in pubs. So that takes time. Other things, you know, I don't know where all the time goes now, but we're working on a new one for North Edinburgh Nightmares. We're going to put something together as well with the investigation and the vaults and the biscuit factory. We did a night there too. So that's going to be coming along soon on the YouTube channel. But we've got lots of plans, but just very little time to put them into, you know, into fruition. But yeah. But always doing that, you know, it will always be updated somewhere down the line.
Yeah, good stuff. Sounds interesting. Well, I'll keep my eye on what comes up on the YouTube channel. It's been great to talk to you again, John. Thanks very much for coming on.
Nice one.
I'll make a nice list of hostelries to visit when I do eventually get myself up to Edinburgh, and I shall raise a glass to all the ghosts that you've told us about. So it's been absolutely great. Thanks very much. Thank you for coming on.
Brilliant. Nice one, Craig. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you. Cheers. Take care. Thank you. You can visit my website at www.craigbryant.co.uk. Paranormal Pendle will return, and remember to keep watching the shadows.